Hey guys, Mr. V here. How you doing? You know what? I got a video for you today. Interesting topic, not one I've talked about. It's about how to use your extra time. Now I know this video doesn't necessarily apply to everyone, or at least it doesn't seem like it does. But even if you're not a student who gets extra time on tests or quizzes, this video will still benefit you because many of us finish our tests early, right? So if we have 40 minutes for our test, some of us finish our test in 25 minutes, right? So that means you have 15 minutes left, right? So you have two options. You can hand in your test 15 minutes early, or you can use that essentially extra time that you have. So whether you get extra time or you're just going to learn how to use the regular time that you have more effectively and efficiently, hopefully you'll get something out of this video. So here are some tips for how to utilize your test taking time in the best possible way. And so we'll start with some basics, and I have some notes on my screen that I'm going to refer to. And the most basic thing is if you have extra time, whether it be, just finishing out the regulation time or utilizing that time beyond when the test is done, use it. Always use your time. Okay. Don't ever hand in your test early. So if you get 40 minutes, use 40 minutes. If you get 50 minutes, use 50 minutes. There's always something you could be doing during that time, no matter how early you finish. Always use it. Two, if you're unsure if you have access to extra time, ask. Uh, Always ask. And number three, before you utilize, this is my own personal opinion, but before you utilize your extra time or before you go into the phase of the test where you're going to be checking your answers, I always like to take a quick break. And that can look like a lot of different things. It could look like an actual break, like a quick walk to the water fountain or a quick walk to the bathroom, like a movement break. That can sometimes really help to clear your mind. But if that's not possible, or you prefer not to leave the room, even just take a seat back, right? Sit back, take a couple deep breaths. Close your eyes, look around the room, give yourself a minute or two just to like reset, and then once you do that, then get back into it and start looking over your test and begin, looking it over for errors and such. That kind of helps me feel refreshed when I go back to look at the test, and maybe I'll see things that I didn't quite think I'd see or didn't see the first time. Those are three super basic extra time tips. Let me look at my notes here. All right, so now we'll broaden our my advice just a little bit here. So one of the first things you should be doing when you're checking over your test is rereading the directions. All right, this is a good time to be highlighting keywords if you didn't already do that. Make sure you understood these directions properly. If you have any questions about them, if you're not sure, just ask. Just always ask. Number two, skim through the test, and I like to start looking at the more complex questions. Um, Oftentimes the more complex questions are more involved, they're lengthier, and sometimes they're even worth more. So you really want to make sure with these ones that you go through each step, make sure you got everything right, because you want to take advantage of these more complex questions that might be worth more. Number three, once you've looked over these complex questions, go back and look at the rest of the test. Remember, you're using extra time. This is bonus time. I would personally rather you work a little slow and be more methodical in your approach to checking over your work, even if that means you don't check over every single question, right? So if there's 50 questions, I'd rather you take your time and do a good job, be thorough, looking over 20 of them, than speeding through it and getting through 50 and maybe missing things a second time, right? That defeats the purpose. If you work slowly, I guarantee you're going to find some things for sure. And number four, ask questions if you have them. Just ask the question. If you're unsure if the teacher's going to be able to answer it or not, ask it anyway. What's the worst thing that happens? The worst case scenario is that the teacher just says to you, you know what, I'm sorry, I can't answer that. The best case scenario is they do answer it and you get clarification on it. And that's what we're looking for here. So those are kind of some broader tips. But now I want to be more specific in my approach. I want to give you some specific ways that you can use your time wisely, extra time on writing assignments. Okay. So number one, you got to start off by reviewing the writing prompt. You got to ask yourself, is what I wrote about answering the question? Is it fulfilling the brief? Um, After that, slowly start reading it. Look for things like punctuation and grammar. Are my commas, periods, and quotations, etc., are they all used appropriately? Maybe you take a look for some spelling errors, some of these basic things, right? The next thing I would do is, well, let me say this. Have you ever reread a piece 2 or 3 times and yet you don't see any errors? Right? You read it, you think it's perfect, and then you get it back from the teacher and there's red marks everywhere. I know the feeling. I've lived that. I've lived it many times. But one thing you can do to try to counteract this wild phenomenon is to try to read your essay backwards. So start with the bottom paragraph, maybe your conclusion, and just read that independently of the whole thing. Just read it, see if it makes sense. Um, then move to the next paragraph up, or read them out of order. And sometimes that can take us kind of out of our flow a little bit, and it helps us to see some things that we didn't see before. The next one, did you write as little as possible? Find ways to elaborate. Are there ways that you can, improve your sentences? Can you find a word for a word that you used, maybe a synonym that can kind of, bring your writing piece, elevate it up just a little bit, a more exciting word, um, beef up your sentences a little bit, elaborate. We don't want to be somebody that's writing as little as possible. Let's see now. Yeah, so that basically kind of sums up some of my writing assessment tips. But now I'm going to give you a couple that are for math, because math sometimes can be a little harder. So again, math, check your directions. Always check your directions. Check your work. Check every step of the problem, right? We understand that sometimes we're solving equations, and these equations have multiple steps. And you could make an error at any one of these steps. And oftentimes the errors that we make in these steps aren't because we're not understanding the problem or the process. It's because we're moving quick, and maybe we're getting one of our basic math facts wrong. How many times have you reviewed a test, maybe after you already got it back? You look at it and you're like, oh my goodness, in the middle of this equation, I added 5 plus 3 and made it equal to 10, because you were just moving quick. You thought you had it and you were just flying through it. So definitely want to check our basic math facts all the way through our equation. Number 5, the next one, does your answer make sense? If they're asking for 20% of 100, that number needs to be less than 100. We know that. That's like math common sense, right? So always check to see, does my answer sound right? Does it even sound like it could possibly be right? And if it doesn't, that could be your first indicator that maybe you need to get back and take another look at this. Now, another one. Now, number 6, is your work legible? This really could go for writing as well, but also for math, because many teachers are giving partial credit for math problems, right? So is it legible? Can the teacher read everything that you've done here? Give the teacher an opportunity to give you more points. I know your teachers. They're looking for ways to help you. They're looking for ways to give you points. Excuse me. And so the last thing I'd say is this tip kind of stands alone because I think it's that important, and that is never leave anything blank on your test. I know sometimes you come across a question, you're just stumped and you just don't know what to do. I would say in those cases, take a break, step away, do another problem, but come back to it and get something on the paper. Again, in line with my last tip, give your teacher a reason to give you points, right? Your teachers want to find ways to give you points. If you leave it blank, your teacher cannot find a way to give you points. So find a way to put something on the paper. And I'll just end by saying, at the end of the day, I've given you a lot of tips. I don't know that it's reasonable for me to expect you to implement all of these. Um, but at the end of the day, you got to use your time. All right. The number one tip is use your time. Whether you implement any of these tips or not, if you're not using your time, you're going to be better if you do use your time, right? So after you start using your time, maybe go back and try to implement some of these tips because I really believe that they could help you and help you take your test taking ability to the next level. And I think we all want to do that, right? Because we live in a world full of tests. We can't avoid them, and we know that. So here are your tips. I hope this makes you a better test taker. If you have any other questions or any other tips that I might have missed, put it in the comments. I'd love to hear about it. Until the next time, stay motivated, everybody.